72 hours. That's all the HOA president gave me to abandon my own home. I was 23, had owned this house for exactly 2 days, and now Karen Fitzgerald stood at my door with eviction papers demanding I leave. She rattled off violation after violation with a smirk that said she'd done this before many times, as she declared herself the law in this neighborhood. I just stood there looking shocked and helpless, but Karen had no idea she'd just walked into a trap. She didn't know I'd been waiting for this.
Exact moment, by the way. Where are you watching? From drop a comment below, because in 72 hours, someone would definitely be leaving. But it wouldn't be me. The HOA queen was about to discover what happens when you target the wrong homeowner. I opened
the door that morning wearing my most confused expression, though I'd already activated the recording device in my pocket. 30 seconds before turning the doorknob, Karen Fitzgerald stood there in her pressed pantsuit, lips pursed like she'd been sucking lemons, flanked by 2 burly men wearing security badges that looked like they came from a Halloween store. "Ryan Cooper?" she asked, though she knew damn well who I was. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, adding just the right amount of nervousness to my voice. She thrust the papers at me with the satisfaction of a cat presenting a dead mouse. "You're in violation of the new HOA age restriction policy. No one under 55 can own property in Willowbrook Heights." My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the effort of suppressing 5 years of rage. This was the exact same trick she'd used on Grandpa Wilson. The memories flooded back unbidden, his trembling voice on that final phone. Call the defeat in his eyes when I'd visited him at the hospital, but I just bought this house. I stammered, letting my voice crack slightly. I read all the CCNRs before closing. There was nothing about age restrictions. Karen's smile widened, revealing teeth too white to be natural. New rules. Sweetie passed last week at the emergency board meeting. She began listing my supposed violations with the enthusiasm of a kid opening Christmas presents. Your grass is 2.6, in regulation is 2.5, your door color doesn't match the new approved palette we just implemented yesterday. Your car is parked at a 3-degree angle from the curb. 47 violations in total, each more ridiculous than the last I knew, because I'd made sure to create every single one of them. The grass height, the door color I'd painted last night, even the precisely angled car, all breadcrumbs leading her exactly where I wanted her. I'd spent 3 hours with a protractor, making sure that car was exactly she'd agreed, knowing she'd measure it. Knowing she couldn't resist such an easy target, Dorothy Miller watched from her window next door, shaking her head. Sadly, she'd seen this play out too many times before, or so. She thought, I am the law here. Karen declared, her voice rising to that pitch that made dogs whine. 72 hours got it. After that, I start filing legal proceedings. And trust me, sweetie, you don't want to go up against me in court. The 2 goons behind her cracked their knuckles. For effect? I let my shoulders slump in defeat. Can I at least get this in writing, the violations? I mean, Karen practically glowed with triumph as she handed over the stack of papers. It's all there, every single infraction. Better start packing what she didn't notice was how perfectly the security camera above my door captured her face. The documents and her 2 intimidating companions, the camera I'd installed at exactly the right angle, tested with dozens of practice runs, positioned to catch every crucial detail in high definition. Even the morning sun worked in my favor, illuminating her face like a spotlight of justice. As she turned to leave, I asked, with a steadiness that surprised even me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Maybe it was the way I asked it too. Calm for someone who'd just been told to leave their home, but Karen Fitzgerald had been running this scam for 8 years, and confidence was her armor. "Oh, sweetie," she laughed. "I've done this more times than you've had hot dinners. Nobody fights the HOA and wins nobody." She marched down my walkway, her heels clicking like a countdown timer. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner before pulling out my phone. The screen lit up with 20 unread messages from S, each one a checkpoint, a confirmation that other pieces were falling into place across the city. The fake buyers were ready, the documentation was prepared, and 3 years of undercover work was about to pay off in ways Karen couldn't imagine. I typed quickly. She fell for it just like you said she would. The reply came instantly. "Good 71 hours to go, kid, stick to the plan." I looked at Grandpa Wilson's photo on the wall, the one where he stood proudly in front of this very house 5 years ago before Karen destroyed his life game on. I whispered. The first phase was complete. Karen had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. She thought she was the predator in the story, but she'd just walked into the web of someone who'd spent 60 months planning her downfall. Every move from here was choreographed, every reaction anticipated. I'd studied her patterns, her greed, her arrogance. I knew she'd escalate tomorrow, because that's what she always did. The security company would come, then the fake buyers, then the attempted break-in, like a chess game, where I could see 15 moves ahead, and she couldn't see past her next victim. I'd analyzed every case, every family she'd destroyed, finding the pattern in her chaos. She always started with the grass height, always moved to intimidation. By day 2, always tried to take possession. By day 3 that night, I sat in Grandpa's old rocking chair, the one he'd carved by hand 50 years ago running. My fingers along the worn armrests where his hands had rested for decades. Tomorrow Karen would try to break me. She'd bring her whole arsenal of intimidation tactics. What she didn't know was that I wanted her to. Every crime she committed, every law she broke, every threat she made would be documented, recorded, and filed, because in 72 hours it wouldn't be me leaving this house. I closed my eyes and let myself remember why I was doing this. Not just for revenge, though. That flame had kept me warm through 5 cold years. This was about justice for the 312 families she destroyed, for the 3 elderly people who died from the shock of losing their homes, and most of all, for Wilson Cooper, the grandfather who raised me and died with Karen Fitzgerald's name on his lips, the man who taught me to ride a bike in this very driveway, who'd built a treehouse in the backyard that still stood weathered but strong like his memory in my heart. Karen had taken him from me, but she'd also given me purpose, forged my pain into a weapon. She never saw coming 6 in the morning, and the sound of lawn mowers jolted me awake, not just one, but what sounded like an army of them. I opened my door, hair still messy from sleep, to find Karen directing 10 landscapers across my lawn. "Morning, sweetie," she called out cheerfully. "Just helping you comply with regulations. That'll be $500 invoice coming later." I rubbed my eyes, feigning shock, while thinking, every action you take is another felony charge. Karen. The landscapers looked uncomfortable, probably wondering why they were terrorizing some kid at dawn, but Karen paid well. And in this economy, questions were a luxury. I noticed one of them secretly shaking his head at me, a silent apology for being part of this circus. He was young, maybe 19, probably supporting his family, caught up in Karen's web just like everyone else she touched. I made a mental note to make sure he wouldn't face charges when this all came crashing down. "You can't just come onto my property," I protested, loud enough for Dorothy to hear from her kitchen. Karen waved a piece of paper like a flag of victory. Emergency maintenance clause. Sweetie. When safety violations aren't addressed, within 24 hours the HOA can take corrective action. Of course, no such clause existed in the real HOA bylaws, but Karen had been printing fake documents for so long, she probably believed her own lies. I pulled out my phone to call the police, making sure she saw me dial Officer Santos, arrived suspiciously. Fast, almost like he'd been waiting around the corner. What seems to be the problem, he asked, though his eyes were already taking in the scene, the illegally trespassing landscapers, Karen's smug expression, my calculated distress. His unmarked car had been parked 3 blocks away since 5:45, waiting for my signal. 3 years undercover in this neighborhood had taught him patience, but I could see the anticipation in his eyes today was a big step toward ending his assignment. This young man is refusing to maintain his property, Karen announced. I'm simply helping him avoid further fines. Santos looked at me, then at Karen, then at the completely normal-look lawn being massacred by industrial equipment man trespassing on private property.
Is a criminal offense, he said. Slowly, Karen's smile never wavered. Officer, I think you'll find everything is perfectly legal. Perhaps you should check with...
Your superiors. The threat was subtle but clear. She'd bought cops before, or at least thought she had. Santos nodded, playing his part perfectly. I'll let you off with a warning this time, Mrs. Fitzgerald. But the homeowner has rights, he winked at me. So quickly I almost missed it, not yet. That wink said, we need more. As he left, he made sure to obviously write down all the landscapers' license plates, letting Karen see him do it. She laughed it off, but I saw the first crack in her confidence, a tiny fissure that would become a chasm by tomorrow night. By 10 days, Karen had escalated to phase 2. A van from Safeguard Security pulled up, and 5 men who looked like they'd been recruited from a biker bar's reject pile strutted onto my property. They started inspecting my mailbox with baseball bats, accidentally knocking it over. Oops, the one of them said, with a grin that showed more gaps than teeth. I ran outside, phone already recording. What are you doing? I shouted, injecting just the right amount of panic into my voice. Security inspection, the lead goon growled. Boss lady says this place is a safety hazard. They painted something illegible on my garage door, probably aiming for threatening but achieving 3rd-grade art project. What they didn't know was that each of them was already in the FBI database, their faces captured by 12 hidden cameras, their voices recorded by microphones that could pick up a whisper from 50 FT away. The lead goon, Marcus Thompson, had 3 prior convictions. The FBI had been waiting for him to commit a federal crime and intimidating. A homeowner across state lines, definitely qualified. Dorothy Miller had seen enough. The 72-year-old former teacher marched out of her house like an avenging angel in house slippers. You boys better get off this property before I call the real police, she announced. The men laughed until she added, I've got all your faces on my doorbell camera, and my grandson works for the FBI. That last part was a lie, but they didn't know that they scattered like roaches when the lights come on, but not before accidentally breaking my fence and throwing trash on my lawn. I made sure to look properly devastated while mentally cataloguing each crime for the case file. Dorothy patted my shoulder. That woman's been terrorizing this neighborhood for
8 years, she said quietly. Started with the Andersons, then the Gans, then poor Mr. Wilson. Her eyes met mine. Your grandfather was a good man. He used to help me with my groceries. Every week, you know, never asked for anything in return. The day Karen
took his house, I saw something die in his eyes. 3 days later, he was gone. She didn't know she was talking to his grandson, but her words hit me like physical blows. That night, Karen posted on the HOA's private social media page, "Warning squatter. Alert at 12:45 Maple Drive. Do not approach or assist the illegal occupant." I screenshotted everything, forwarding it to Santos with a simple message defamation of character check, inciting harassment check. How many more felonies do we need? His response was immediate. "She's still small time in the eyes of a jury. We need." The big gun knew what he meant. Tomorrow was day 3, when Karen always brought out her nuclear option, the fake buyers, and the attempted illegal entry. She was so predictable. It was almost sad. I sat in the darkness, laptop open, reviewing 5 years of research, every victim statement, every forged document, every pattern in her crimes. "You did this same thing to at least 20 people, didn't you, Karen?" I muttered. "But Grandpa, Wilson was the one you shouldn't have touched." The screen showed her real estate company's records illegally obtained, but revealing she'd made $12 million in 8 years, all from stolen homes. Tomorrow, that empire would begin to crumble. As midnight approached, I heard rustling. Outside, the security camera caught Karen herself, sneaking around my house with a can of something gasoline paint. It didn't matter. She was checking windows, testing doors, looking for weaknesses. I texted, "Santos, she's early. Guess we're speeding things up." Then I sat back and waited. In chess, sometimes the best move is not to move at all. Let your opponent think they're winning, while they position themselves perfectly for checkmate. Karen Fitzgerald thought she was a queen on this board, but she was about to discover she'd been a pawn in my game all along. Through the window, I watched her creeping around like a cartoon villain, completely unaware that 15 hidden cameras were capturing her every move in crystal clearer high definition. And she tried to jimmy the back door with a credit card, not knowing I'd installed a special lock that would record the attempt. "Sweet dreams, Karen," I whispered. "Enjoy your last night of freedom. Tomorrow would bring the crescendo of our twisted symphony, and I would be the conductor of her downfall. 24 hours left. Get out or get sued." The banner stretched across my lawn was so large it could probably be seen from space. Karen stood proudly beside it at 7 in the morning, surrounded by 20 potential buyers who were all eagerly touring my property without permission. What she didn't know was that 15 of them were wearing tiny FBI badges. Hidden under their jackets, I stumbled out in my pajamas, playing the part of the overwhelmed young homeowner. "You can't bring people to view my house. I own this property," I shouted, making sure my voice carried to all the neighbors who had started gathering to watch the show. Karen smirked and pulled out what she claimed was a master key. "HOA emergency access. Sweetie, we need to ensure the property is safe for viewing." The arrogance in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. She genuinely believed she was untouchable, that 8 years of successful theft had made her invincible today. That delusion would be her downfall. She jammed the key into my lock, but of course it didn't work because I'd changed the locks at 2 odd in the morning. The look of confusion on her face was priceless. Then confusion turned to rage as she tried to force it, getting her hands stuck in the process. "This is my house," she screamed, yanking frantically. "I bought it 50,000 cash." The fake buyers exchanged glances, some of them suppressing smiles. One of them, playing his role perfectly, stepped forward to examine the purchase documents Karen was waving with her free hand. "Ma'am, this signature looks exactly like your handwriting," he observed innocently. Karen's face went through several shades of red before she snatched the papers back, accidentally tearing them in half. "Don't you dare question me," she shrieked. I quietly picked up the torn pieces, whispering, just loud enough for the cameras, "Thank you for destroying your own forged evidence." Agent Mitchell, posing as a buyer, made sure to photograph every piece as I collected them, evidence that would be crucial in court. Dorothy had her phone out recording everything. While pretending to water her plants, several other neighbors had joined her, creating an impromptu documentary crew. Mrs. Patterson, from 2 houses down, was live streaming to her knitting circle, unknowingly helping document federal crimes. Karen, finally freeing her hand, decided to escalate to property destruction. She began throwing my belongings out the windows she'd somehow pried open, starting with some old books and working her way up to my $3, the HOA laptop. The laptop that Grandpa had given me for my 18th birthday, the last gift he ever gave me when it shattered on the concrete. I didn't have to fake the tears, they were real, flowing from 5 years of suppressed grief and rage. Every broken piece is another year in prison, I thought, watching the fragments scatter across the driveway. Karen laughed at my tears. "Whoops, Butterfingers, maybe you should have moved out when I asked nicely." Her cruelty in that moment was so pure, so undiluted, that even some of the undercover agents looked genuinely disgusted. That's when she made her biggest mistake, drunk on power and surrounded by what she thought were supporters. Karen held up her ownership papers and announced loudly, "I've been doing this for 20 years. Nobody has ever beaten me. This house is legally mine as of noon today." She turned to the crowd of buyers. "Who wants to see the master bedroom?" Karen's victory turned to confusion as sirens screamed in the distance. "I have friends in the police department," she cried frantically. "One phone call and you'll all be arrested." However, something was happening. The buyers weren't moving. Instead, they were slowly forming a circle around her. One of them spoke into his sleeve, and another took out handcuffs. When I stood up, wiping my tears, and for the first time let her see the real me. No more acting, no more pretending to be scared. "Are you sure about that, Karen?" I asked, my voice steady as steel, "because I think your friends are a little busy right now. You see, while you were here playing your little eviction game, the FBI was raiding your office, your home, and the homes of every single person in your network. Did you really think you were the only one being watched today?" The sirens grew louder. Not just 1 or 2 patrol cars, but an entire fleet FBI vehicles surrounded the house like something out of a movie. Karen spun in circles, watching her escape routes disappear. "No," she whispered. "This isn't possible. You're just some stupid kid." But I wasn't just some kid. I was the grandson of Wilson Cooper, and I'd spent 5 years preparing for this moment. The fake security guards from yesterday, they were already in custody, singing like canaries about every illegal job Karen had hired them for the landscapers. From this morning, they'd been wearing wires. Every word, every threat, every admission of guilt had been recorded in perfect clarity. Dorothy stepped forward, no longer pretending to be just a concerned neighbor. "I've been waiting 8 years to see you get what you deserve," she said quietly. "Wilson was my friend. I held his hand in the hospital. His last words were about the grandson he worried about leaving alone. He'd be so proud to see you now, Ryan." Her eyes met mine with understanding. She'd known who I was all along. As the FBI vehicles screeched to a halt, Karen made one last desperate attempt to flee. She stumbled in her designer heels, falling face first into the very lawn she'd criticized when she looked up, mud covering her perfectly made-up face. She found herself staring at 15 FBI badges, federal agents. Nobody moved. The lead agent stepped forward, and it wasn't Officer Santos like she'd expected. It was a woman with cold, professional eyes and a voice like ice. "Karen Fitzgerald," the agent said. "My name is Special Agent Jessica Fitzgerald. You might know me better as your daughter." The look on Karen's face was worth 5 years of waiting, pure, unadulterated shock as she recognized the child she'd swindled 15 years ago. "Jessica, She gasped, "What are you doing here?" But Jessica wasn't there for a reunion, she was there for justice. "Hi, Mum," she said coldly. "We need to talk about what you did to Grandpa Wilson. You see, I've been investigating you for 3 years, and when
I found out what you did to the Coopers. I made sure to be the one to bring you down. Ryan here isn't the only one who lost a grandfather to your greed, but he's the one who had the courage to do something about it. The crowd of neighbors erupted.
In shocked whispers, the fake buyers revealed their badges one by one. Karen's world collapsed in real time as she realized the depth of the deception. 20 years, she muttered, still in shock. 20 years of perfect crimes. I stepped closer, looking down at her mud-covered face. No such thing as a perfect crime. Karen, just criminals who haven't been caught yet. And your time just ran out as they lifted her to her feet. She looked around wildly, searching for any ally, any escape, but there was nothing. Every person she'd trusted was either an agent or a victim. Every escape route was blocked. Every asset she'd hidden was already frozen. The game was over, and she'd lost everything in exactly 72 hours, just like she'd threatened to do to me. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, you're under arrest for 37 federal counts of fraud, extortion, racketeering, and conspiracy." Agent Jessica Fitzgerald's voice carried no emotion as she read her own mother her rights. Karen's world was crumbling faster than a cookie and milk. "Jessica, baby, you don't understand," Karen pleaded, mascara running down her cheeks like black rivers. "Everything I did was for us, for our future." But Jessica had heard these lies before 15 years ago when Karen had convinced her to sign over her college fund for a brilliant investment opportunity. That money had disappeared into Karen's designer handbag collection, leaving Jessica to work 3 jobs. "Through law school, save it for the judge, Mom," Jessica replied coldly. The other agents moved in, efficiently searching Karen's car and finding exactly what we knew. They'd find boxes of forged documents, fake HOA letterheads, and a laptop containing 8 years of criminal evidence. Agent Mitchell pulled out folder after folder, each one. A life destroyed, a family broken. Anderson family, 2019, Lou family, 2020, Cooper family, 2019. He paused at that last one, looking at me. This one has a note: "Old fool died faster than expected. Bonus, Santos." Karen screamed. Spotting him among the agents, "We had a deal. I paid you." Santos slowly removed his baseball cap, revealing the FBI badge he'd hidden for 3 years. "Special Agent Miguel Santos. Actually, and that money you paid me, it's all been documented as evidence of bribing a law enforcement officer. Thanks for that additional charge." By the way, the transformation on Karen's face was something to behold. 8 years of arrogance crumbled in seconds as she realized every single person she thought was under her control had been working against her. The landscapers, the security guards, even some of the HOA board members she'd thought were loyal. All FBI, all building a case that would bury her deeper than the Mariana Trench. The Hendersons, FBI. The new couple that moved in last year, FBI. That nice young man who fixed your computer. FBI Cyber Division. We've had you surrounded for 3 years. Karen, every crime, every victim, every dollar you stole. We know everything. They found the jackpot. In her trunk, 212 folders, each one representing a family she'd destroyed. As the agents pulled them out, reading names aloud, neighbors began recognizing their own stories. Anderson family forced out in 2019. Mrs. Anderson, watching from across the street, began to cry. Harrison family, 2020. The Harrisons had lost their retirement home. Wilson Cooper, 2019, deceased 3 days after eviction. That one hit different. The whole crowd went silent as the reality sank in. This wasn't just fraud, this was murder. By paperwork, death, by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. Dorothy grabbed my hand, squeezing tight. "She killed them," she whispered. "3 people died because of her greed, but it was worse than that." As they dug deeper into the files, they found Karen's private notes. A scoring system points for each eviction bonuses for properties over 500,000, special marks for victims who died within a month. He'd gified human misery turned destroying. Lives into a sport. Karen was still trying to process what was happening when they found the file that changed everything. Her handwritten notes in the margins of Grandpa Wilson's folder. Old fool was easier than expected. Heart condition makes him.
Perfect target should be gone within a week. Already showing signs of stress. Bonus point. If he goes before the weekend, I couldn't hold back anymore. You knew I shouted breaking character completely. You knew he had a heart condition, and you targeted
Him, specifically. The agents had to hold me back as 5 years of suppressed rage exploded. He raised me. He was all I had. Karen looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time. "Cooper," she whispered. "Wilson Cooper, you're—" The pieces finally clicked.
In her mind, you're his grandson, the one in the photos, the one he talked about. She turned even paler. You've been planning this, all of this, the house, the violations, everything. It was all fake. I stepped closer, held back by Santos's firm grip. "No, Karen, this house is very real. Grandpa left it to me. In his will, you tried to steal it from him before he could sign the papers, but he did it anyway 3 hours before he died. This house you're trying to steal, I already own it. I've owned it for 5 years. FBI, someone shouted, and more agents poured out of unmarked vans. This wasn't just an arrest anymore. This was a full-scale raid. They weren't just taking down Karen, they were dismantling an entire network as they loaded box after box of evidence.
Karen's phone rang incessantly. Other HOA presidents, her co-conspirators, all calling to warn her about FBI raids at their own homes. But it was too late. The dominoes were falling across 4 states. "You set me up," Karen said, looking at me with a mixture of hatred and bewilderment. A 23-year-old nobody set me up. I stepped closer to the police car, looking her straight in the eye through the window. "My name is Ryan Wilson," I said. Clearly, Cooper was all.
My grandmother's maiden name. I'm Wilson's grandson, the one you killed. And yes, I set you up. Every single moment of the last 72 hours was orchestrated. Every violation you cited, every crime you committed, every word you said, I knew you'd measure.
The grass, 'cause you always do. I knew you'd bring the fake security, 'cause that's step 2 in your playbook. I knew you'd try to break in on day 3, 'cause you've done it 47 times before. You're not unpredictable. Karen, you're a creature of
habit, and I studied those habits for 5 years. For the first time in 8 years, Karen Fitzgerald had nothing to say. No quick comeback, no threat, no attempt to talk her way out. She sat in the back of that patrol car, staring at me with eyes that finally
understood the magnitude of her mistake. She'd thought I was just another easy mark, another young person she could intimidate and destroy. Instead, she'd walked into a trap 5 years in the making, orchestrated by someone who turned grief into patience, rage into strategy. As the convoy of police cars pulled away, taking Karen to face justice for 312 families, I stood in the driveway of the house she'd tried to steal. For the first time in 5 years, I allowed myself to truly cry. Not tears of performance or manipulation, but genuine grief for the grandfather who'd never see this moment of justice. Santos walked over, removing his FBI jacket. "You did good, kid. Wilson would be proud." He handed me a tissue. "We've got enough evidence to put her away for 45 years. She'll die in prison." But that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that Karen Fitzgerald's reign of terror was over. No more elderly people would lose their homes to her greed. No more families would be destroyed by her forged documents. The Queen had been dethroned, and her kingdom of corruption was crumbling. I looked up at the sky where storm clouds were gathering. "We got her, Grandpa." I whispered, "We got them all." Thunder rumbled in the distance like applause from heaven itself. 5 years, 825 days, I'd woken up with the same burning purpose it started in a hospital room at St. Mary's Medical Center, holding Grandpa Wilson's trembling hand as monitors beeped their countdown to goodbye. Karen Fitzgerald. He'd whispered each word, a struggle. She took everything. Those were his last coherent words before the machines sang their final song. I was 18, about to start college, suddenly alone in the world, but I wasn't just grieving, I was planning. The next 2 years were spent becoming a digital detective. I'd learned to code not for a career, but to hack into HOA databases. I studied law not to become a lawyer, but to understand exactly how Karen operated every night after my minimum wage jobs. I'd research her patterns, her victims, her methods. She was methodical, targeting specific demographics, elderly homeowners with health conditions, young people with no family support, anyone vulnerable and isolated. The pattern was so clear once you looked for it. Properties worth between
300,000 and 600,000 owners, over 70 or under 25 bonus points if they had no close family. She was a predator with a formula, and I was going to use that formula against her. By year 3, I'd compiled enough evidence to approach the FBI. At first, they
thought I was just another grieving relative chasing shadows. Then I showed them the pattern: 3 $12 victims across 4 states, $47 million in stolen property, 3 deaths that could be traced directly to the trauma of eviction. Special Agent Santos became my handler, impressed by my methodical documentation. This is bigger than just one corrupt HOA president. He'd said, this is organized crime. That's when the real training began. The FBI taught me to be bait, to play the perfect victim. I learned to control my emotions, to cry on cue, to project vulnerability while maintaining tactical awareness. They called it Operation Golden Years. And I was their secret weapon. 6 months of intensive training, learning to lie with my body language, to sell fear, while feeling none, to be the perfect mark, while secretly being the hunter they brought in, drama coaches, former con artists, even a Hollywood consultant. I became an actor, playing the role of my life. Literally, the house on Maple Drive wasn't. Random Karen had been circling it for 3 years, ever since the previous owner had died. It was her white whale worth 3 times what she usually targeted. I knew she couldn't resist when a 23-year-old kid bought it. I'd saved every penny for 5 years, worked 3 jobs, lived on ramen and determination. The FBI helped with the down payment in exchange for my cooperation. Every detail was planned, the timing of my move, the calculated HOA violations, even the specific angle I parked my car. We knew Karen's playbook better than she did. Day 1 would be the fake eviction notice. Day 2 would bring intimidation tactics. Day 3 would climax with her attempting to take possession like clockwork. She'd followed the script she'd written with dozens of previous victims. The FBI psychologist had profiled her perfectly. A narcissist with a god complex. She couldn't deviate from her pattern because in her mind it was perfect. She was incapable of seeing the trap because she was incapable of imagining failure. Dorothy Miller had been Grandpa's friend, the only one who tried to help him fight Karen. 8 years ago, she didn't know about the FBI operation initially, but she knew I was Wilson's grandson from the moment I'd introduced myself. You have his eyes, she'd said that first day, and his determination she'd become my unknowing ally, providing authentic reactions that sold my performance. Her genuine anger at Karen added credibility to our charade when she'd mentioned Grandpa yesterday, saying Wilson was a good man. I'd almost broken character. The emotion in my response had been real bleeding through my carefully constructed facade, because no matter how much I'd prepared, hearing his name still felt like touching a live wire. Later, Santos had approached her, revealing just enough to secure her cooperation. She'd cried when she learned the truth, then hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. I knew he'd raised a fighter, she'd whispered. Now, sitting in my empty house, surrounded by FBI agents, cataloguing evidence, Santo showed me the final tally: 312 victims identified, 47 million in assets recovered, 23 co-conspirators arrested across 4 states. It was impressive, but numbers couldn't capture the human cost. Mrs. Chair, forced to live with her children after losing her independence. Mr. Anderson, whose final years were spent in a nursing home instead of his garden, and Grandpa Wilson, who died of a broken heart. 3 days after Karen stole his home, she kept trophies, Santos said quietly. Showing me a box from Karen's office. Inside were photos of victims being evicted, labeled with dates, and dollar amounts like a sick scrapbook. Grandpa's photo was there, dated 3 days before his death, with a note, easier than expected, already looking unwell. My hands shook as I held that photo. It was taken the day she'd served him the fake eviction. Notice he looked so small, so defeated, nothing like the giant of a man who'd raised me. There's something else, Santos continued. Karen wants to see you before the trial, says she has information about your grandfather's last day, something only Wilson would have known. She's offering it in exchange for a plea deal. My blood turned to ice. What could she possibly know? But I shook my head. No deals. Whatever she knows dies with her in prison. Santos nodded approvingly. That's what I told the prosecutor. But I thought you should know. As the agents finished their work, I walked through the house that had been both bait and battlefield. In the spare bedroom, I'd hidden a photo of Grandpa and me from my 13th birthday, both of us grinning over a homemade cake. We did it, I whispered to the photo. The woman who killed you is going to pay for every life she destroyed. My phone buzzed. Jessica Fitzgerald, the prosecutor, who happened to be Karen's arranged daughter, texted, "Trial starts Monday, we're going." To bury her, the poetry of it wasn't lost on me. Karen's own daughter would be the one to deliver justice. The child she'd swindled would become her destroyer. Sometimes the universe had a sense of humor, darker than any crime novel, but there was one more thing to do. I opened my laptop and began typing a website for victims of HOA fraud, resources, legal templates, warning signs by morning. It would be live, Grandpa's. Legacy wouldn't just be justice for the past, but protection for the future. Every family saved would be another victory for Wilson Cooper, another proof that good could triumph over evil, even if it took 5 years, and an FBI task force to do it. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver looked like a fortress of justice, and in a way it was Monday morning brought a parade of victims. 89 of them, some in wheelchairs, others leaning on walkers, all united by the damage Karen Fitzgerald had inflicted. I sat in the front row, wearing the only suit I owned, the one I'd bought. For Grandpa's funeral, the media called it the trial of the century for white-collar crime. But for us, it was personal. Karen entered in an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair now grey at the roots, her designer nails replaced by bare, bitten fingers. Prison had already begun its work when her eyes found mine in the gallery. I saw something I'd never seen before, fear, real bone-deep terror at the consequences of her actions. She looked smaller, somehow like the orange jumpsuit had shrunk her to her actual size without her power suits and carefully crafted image. She was just a frightened woman facing the avalanche she triggered with her own greed. Jessica Fitzgerald stood to deliver the opening statement, and the courtroom held its breath. "Your Honor, the defendant, Karen Fitzgerald, is my mother." Gasps rippled through the room. 15 years ago, she convinced me to sign over my college fund, claiming it was for a family emergency. That money funded her first HOA scheme. I've spent my entire career preparing for this moment, not out of vengeance, but out of duty to the 312 families she destroyed. The prosecutor laid out the case with surgical precision. Forged documents appeared on screens, audio recordings of Karen bragging about her crimes played for the jury. The fake buyers from day 3 testified about her admissions. Each piece of evidence was another nail in her coffin, hammered home by her own daughter's unwavering pursuit of justice. Jessica's voice never wavered. Even when presenting evidence of her own mother's cruelty, she'd compartmentalized her pain into purpose, transformed betrayal into justice. It was both heartbreaking and inspiring to watch. Then came the victims. Mrs. Harrison took the stand first, her voice shaking as she described losing the home where she'd raised her children. 50 years of memories gone because I trusted the HOA president. Mr. Anderson followed. Still bitter, after 5 years my wife died, thinking we'd failed, that we'd lost our home through some mistake we'd made. She never knew. It was theft. One by one they told their stories. But the moment that broke the courtroom came when Dorothy Miller testified. Wilson Cooper was my neighbor for 30 years after Karen took his house. I watched him fade like a photograph in the sun. 3 days later, he was gone. She didn't just steal property, she stole lives. Dorothy's voice cracked as she continued. I found him that morning. He was holding a photo of his grandson Ryan. His last words to me were, "Take care of my boy, I failed him then." But Ryan didn't fail his grandfather. He brought justice when the rest of us could only bring Cassilies and sympathy cards. The most dramatic moment came when Jessica called a surprise witness. The prosecution calls Bradley, a young man in an FBI jacket, took the stand. Karen's face went white. Bradley had been one of her muscle, the fake security guards she'd hired for intimidation. But Bradley was actually Agent Mitchell undercover for 18 months. His testimony was devastating. He'd recorded hundreds of hours of Karen planning crimes, bribing officials and laughing about her victims. She kept score. He testified points for each eviction, bonuses for properties worth over $500,000. She called it the game, but the recording that ended everything was Karen's own voice. Drunk at a Christmas party, boasting to her inner circle, "The old ones are the easiest. Find one with a heart condition, apply pressure, and nature does the rest like that, Wilson fool." 3 days, just like I predicted. The jury's faces hardened with each word. One juror was crying, another looked like he wanted to jump over the rail and strangle Karen himself. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes, guilty on all 37 federal counts. The judge, a stern woman who'd overseen organized crime cases for 20 years, delivered the sentence with visible satisfaction. Karen Fitzgerald, you turned a position of trust into a weapon of destruction. You preyed on the vulnerable with calculated cruelty. This court sentences you to 45 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will pay full restitution to all victims. You are permanently barred from any position of authority in any organization. Karen tried to stand to make some final statement, but Her legs gave out as court officers moved to help her. She looked at Jessica with tears streaming. "I'm your mother," she whispered. Jessica's response was, "Ice cold, you were never my mother. Mothers protect you only destroyed the BF. Read out the additional sentences for the murder by depraved indifference of Wilson Cooper, Harold Anderson, and Margaret Anderson. An additional 15 years to be served consecutively. Total sentence, 60 years. Karen would die in prison. There was no other possible
outcome. As they led Karen away, I stood and called out, "Mrs. Fitzgerald."
She turned, hope flickering in her eyes like a dying candle. Maybe I would forgive her. Show mercy. Give her something to hold on to. Instead, I delivered Grandpa's message. Wilson Cooper wanted me to tell you something. You gave him 72 hours to leave. His home, he lived exactly 72 hours after that. You killed him as surely as if you'd pulled a trigger today. You got 60 years to think about that. He got 3 days. You do the math. The courtroom erupted in applause as Karen was dragged away, finally understanding that her reign of terror hadn't just ended, it had been systematically dismantled by the grandson of her first victim outside the courthouse. Reporters swarmed, but I had nothing to say. My work was done. Justice had been served. The trap I'd spent 5 years building had snapped shut perfectly, but there was no joy in it, only a hollow satisfaction. Grandpa was still gone. Those 3 days he'd suffered couldn't be undone. All I could do was ensure Karen suffered 60 years in return as I walked. Away from the courthouse, Jessica caught up with me. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me the chance to make this right." We shook hands. 2 children damaged by Karen Fitzgerald, finding closure in her downfall. The storm that had been building finally broke rain. Washing the courthouse steps clean, it felt appropriate, like the sky itself was cleansing the world of Karen's stain. 6 months later, Willowbrook Heights had transformed from a neighborhood ruled by fear into a community built on trust. The street sign now read Wilson Cooper Memorial Drive, a tribute voted on unanimously by residents who finally had a voice. I had been elected HOA president with 100% of the vote, making me the youngest in the nation. At 23, my first act was simple: no decision without 100% resident consent. The old board, mostly Karens. Puppets had resigned in shame. Dorothy Miller served as vice president, bringing wisdom and warmth to every meeting. Wilson would be dancing in heaven, she said. The day we installed the new sign, the house on Maple Drive had become more than just my home. It was a symbol that the neighborhood could heal, that Karen's poison could be purged. Every Sunday, I hosted coffee for the neighbors using Grandpa's old percolator, serving his famous cinnamon rolls from his secret recipe. The house that had been bait for a trap was now the heart of a healing community. The ripple effects of Karen's arrest spread across the country like wildfire. The Cooper Law, named after Grandpa, passed in all 50 states, protecting homeowners from predatory HOA practices. 200 other corrupt HOA boards fell under FBI investigation. 89 facing federal charges. The Bureau created a dedicated unit for HOA fraud, trained using our case as the textbook example. Santos, promoted to special agent in charge, sent me updates on each new arrest. Your grandfather started something bigger than any of us imagined. He wrote, "Every family we save is part of his legacy." The $47 million recovered from Karen's schemes was distributed among her victims, many finally able to reclaim their lives. The 3 families who'd lost loved ones received special compensation, though no amount of money could restore what Karen had stolen. Mrs. Harrison used her settlement to buy a small house near her grandchildren. Mr. Anderson donated his to a legal fund for elderly victims of fraud. Everyone found their own way to heal. During herself became a cautionary tale in federal prison. Other inmates, many of whom had elderly parents, made her life particularly difficult. She'd tried establishing a pod HOA attempting to control shower schedules and commissary purchases. It lasted exactly 1 day before the other women shut her down. Her daughter, Jessica, never visited, focusing instead on prosecuting similar cases. Nationwide Heron wrote 47 letters, begging forgiveness, all returned, unopened. She had 59 years and 6 months left to serve, assuming she lived that long. At 74, she'd be eligible for release, though the chances of surviving that long in federal prison were slim. Karma, it seemed, had its own HOA, and Karen's violations were permanent. I heard through Santos that she had aged 10 years and 6 months, that her hair was completely grey. Now that she spent most of her time in solitary for her own protection, I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, only a grim acknowledgement that justice sometimes looked like a small grey cell. I spent my days coding, finally free to pursue the career I'd put on hold for justice, but evenings were for the community, helping other victims navigate their recoveries. The email from Texas had been the first of many. Please help, our HOA president is trying to evict my grandmother. They came from Arizona, Florida, California, desperate families facing their own Karens. I couldn't fight every battle, but I could share the playbook. I created a website with resources, legal templates and warning signs of HOA fraud. The visitor counter hit 1 million. Within 3 months, comments poured in from people who'd successfully fought back. Using our methods, each victory was a small piece of Grandpa's legacy spreading across America. The website featured his photo on the homepage with the quote that had become our motto: "A community is only as strong as how it treats its most vulnerable members." Grandpa had said that at a town meeting 20 years ago. Now it was inspiring. Change nationwide. On quiet evenings, I'd sit in Grandpa's rocking chair, the one Karen had tried to sit in during her attempted takeover. The photo wall had grown from just Grandpa and me to include hundreds of families who'd reclaimed their homes. Mrs. Harrison had sent a picture of her grandchildren playing in the yard. Karen had tried to take. The Andersons had renewed their vows in their recovered garden. Each image was proof that evil could be defeated when good people stood together. Dorothy often joined me for tea, sharing stories about Grandpa I'd never heard. "He was so proud of you," she'd say. "Even before all this, he knew you were special." Those conversations healed wounds I didn't know I still carried. We'd flip through old photo albums, Dorothy pointing out moments I'd forgotten. Grandpa teaching the neighborhood kids to fish. Grandpa organizing block parties. Grandpa being the heart of Willowbrook Heights long before it had a HOA to corrupt it, as the first anniversary of Karen's arrest approached. I received an unexpected package, no return address, but I recognized the shaky handwriting inside was a single photo, Grandpa as a young man, standing proudly in front of the very first house he'd ever owned. On the back in Karen's writing, "Found this in my files. Thought you should have it. I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time, then added it to the wall with all the others. Not as forgiveness. Some things were unforgivable, but as closure. Karen had taken everything from Grandpa, except this one photo hidden in her trophy collection. Now even that small victory had been reversed. The hunter had become nothing, while her prey's legacy grew stronger every day. I looked at the wall of photos, then at Dorothy, then out the window. At the peaceful street that bore Grandpa's name, we'd won more than a legal battle. We'd reclaimed a community. We'd proven that love was stronger than greed, that patience could defeat power, that a 23-year-old with nothing but determination and an FBI task force could bring down an empire of corruption. Dorothy looked directly at the camera we'd set up for the documentary and winked, "Don't be a Karen, folks, Ryan. Wilson is watching and he's got all the time in the world. The hunt never truly ends because evil always finds new forms." But now they knew we were ready. Now they knew that every Karen would meet her Ryan, every predator would find a patient hunter waiting. The grandson of Wilson Cooper had turned grief into justice, and that justice had become a movement welcome to the new world, where HOAs served homeowners instead of stealing from them, where the elderly were protected instead of preyed upon, where a 23-year-old with nothing but determination could bring down an empire
of corruption. This was Grandpa's world now, and we were all just living in it. The trap had been sprung, the queen had fallen, and the kingdom finally belonged to its rightful citizens. Game over Karen, game permanently, irreversibly, eternally over.